What's up guys, my name is Daniel, and in today's lesson we're actually going to be going through abstract data types. So what are abstract data types? So abstract data types are basically classes. Okay, they are classes. It's just that they are a different way of creating classes, but it's basically the same thing. And if you watched my previous lessons, you realize that after the end of this lesson, you realize that we actually were going about the way of creating abstract data types. Okay, so just still continue with this lesson, because we're also going to be going through constructors. Okay, so really this video is about constructors, because we've really covered abstract data types, but just for the sake of understanding exactly what ADTs are, and if your lecturer does ask you to actually create an ADT, you know exactly what is expected of you. Okay, so first things first, just create a new project, file, new project, you know how it goes, and you should be met with a screen like this where we're about to actually start coding. So let's just create a class. Now in this example, we're going to be creating a class of a person. I've explained the class of a person before, but even new people who are watching this video should still stick around, and because this video is not based off of prior knowledge, it's purely about ADTs and constructors. Okay, so we're going to create a class of a person, class person, and we're going to give it public scope and a private scope. Okay, in the private scope we want just the string, which is first name, and string last name. Okay, and a lot of you guys may need to include string here, so we'll have that there. We'll have the first name and the last name, and then what else do we want to have? That's basically it. Okay, however, we're going to create something new called a constructor. Okay, so I'll explain what a constructor is in a few, but for now just know that it is a function. Okay, I just needed to check something real quick. So why is it called person? So the name of the constructor is basically the name of the class itself. Okay, it's the name of the class itself. So what is the point of a constructor? The point of a constructor is it's basically the first function that runs in the declaration or the instantiation of a class. So when you create a class, or when you actually create an object from a class, this class code runs. The first function that executes, it's this one, it's the first one itself, sorry, it's the constructor itself. Okay, and that may be good or beneficial for a lot of reasons. You don't need to immediately start calling functions. You can just declare the class or instantiate it, and then automatically whatever you need setting up will get set up. For example, say you're a creator, right, and you're creating a person. You want a function called person to run immediately as soon as you create that person, and maybe, for example, you state things like give this person 2 arms, right, give him 2 hands, give him 2 legs, give him 2 feet, give him 10 fingers, give him 10 toes, give him a head, a nose, whatever, and then once you're done with that, then you can start creating or filling in the intricacies of whatever else is missing. Okay, so that's basically it. And how does this change the way we write code? So let's instantiate this class. Okay, so normally we'll go person, and then we'll give it, let's just say Daniel is a person. So when Daniel is created, this function will run. Right now we didn't even we didn't write the definition of this function, so let's just go ahead over at the bottom and do that. Implementation, and now we're gonna say, okay, person Alright, so basically what's going on here is that person is the name of the class, as you know, and then person is the name of the constructor, right? So since they share the same name, it's person, and then we can start writing our implementation right here. So now you'll notice something. We don't have anything here. We don't have anything inside of this person doesn't take in anything. So usually when, like I said, when you're creating a class, you want to initialize a lot of variables. For example, you have first name here, you have last name. How else are we going to initialize these values? We're going to have to initialize them by creating accessors and mutators, okay? So, but we don't have to do that. We can just initialize these values at the very beginning. So we can pass in a string, the first name, and then we can pass in another string called last name, for instance, right? But I'll just say my first name, and then I'll give it my last name, just to clear some confusion, right? So my first name and my last name are the values that are going to be initialized, right? So, and then in the implementation, we're going to pass in my first name okay, sorry, it's a string my first name and string my last name, like that. Okay, so now what we're gonna do now is that we're gonna set, just like how you did with the setters and getters, we're gonna now set the first name and the last name to whatever it is that we get from this function. Think of this function as a setter for now, although it's not, it's a constructor. But just like how we did things with setting values, this is how we're going to do it when with the constructor. So we're going to say first name is equals to my first name. So it's basically first name is this, and then my first name is this from the constructor, okay? And secondly, last name is equals to my last name, like that. Okay, so now in the main function, how we instantiate is we say person, right? That's the name of the class, and then the name of the object will be Daniel, and then inside of these braces, we're gonna pass in whatever is required of us, because we know that when we call Daniel, we need to pass in whatever values that are here. Okay, so we're gonna have to pass in the first name and the last name. I'm gonna pass in Daniel, and I'm gonna pass in Jumpman, like that. Okay, so this is a string in a string, but we have an error, and I don't know what's causing this error. Let's just see what it is. Too many characters in character constant. Okay, so we're not supposed to do this. It's supposed to be double quotation marks, not single quotation marks. Thank you for that, and I'll get rid of that. Okay, so now we don't have any problems anymore. We can run this program just to test if it works and we don't get any errors. And of course we don't get any errors, but we also don't get any outputs because we didn't create any outputs for this program. Okay, so but that's just to verify that we don't have any programs, right? So we've declared the class and the constructor, and we've also written the implementation. So really this string called Daniel should be inside of the first name, Jumpman should be inside of the last name. Okay, so let's create a function that outputs, and so that we can verify that indeed this information has been passed into this class object. Okay, so we're going to create a function called output, but before that I'm gonna declare it first. So I'm going to say void output, or let me just say void display name, right? And we need to write the definition of this. the implementation. So I'm going to say void. Okay, I'm going to say void person, start with class, scope operator, and then I'm going to say display name, and I'm going to write my output, right? Just bear with me. Your first name is, I'm going to say first name, and then I'm going to say, and your last name is, I'm going to say last name, end line, like that. And if I run this, oh, nothing happens because we didn't actually call the function. So I'm going to call the function here. I'm going to say Daniel, not person, Daniel dot display name. That's a function, so we add our braces, and then we can run this. Let's run that, and there we go. Your first name is Daniel and your last name is Jumpman. Okay, so that's how it goes, guys. It's very simple. The display name was called just after we've initialized these variables in the class itself. So what basically happened here, the class, we instead of doing it the traditional way where we just declare it as Daniel and then we go on to the next line and say Daniel dot set name, Daniel dot what, instead of that, in one line, because we know that this function will run immediately and we can set anything we wanted to set it to, then we can just pass in these values like that. Now I just want to explain something, okay? With this constructor, because this is a constructor, right? If you want, you can also do things like, let's just say we want to instantiate another person, right? Let's say James, for example. We can say person and then we say James, and maybe you want to leave it like this. Maybe sometimes you don't want to actually pass in anything, you don't want to pass in any values. So really you need to also create another constructor, and you can create a lot of constructors, by the way. So you can have a constructor called person that whereas you don't need to pass in anything. This is a constructor without any parameters, and this now will work. So James can be empty, so I can just call James. I can say James dot display, what's the problem? James oh, okay, so we have a problem. I can't call, yes, okay, before we do this, before I confuse you guys, we didn't actually write the definition of person, so let's just do that first. So down here, maybe just above, because we've put it above this other constructor, we'll have this constructor sit here, and we'll say person, same way we declared the first one, person, but this one without any parameters passed to it. We can set well, we don't need to set anything. What am I doing? Okay, but we can just create it right there, and then the squiggly line can disappear. So now I don't know why James, okay, there we go, James dot display name, there we go. So we can call James dot display name without the braces, okay? And if we call James dot display name, you will notice that nothing will happen. If I run that, you'll see, okay, it actually does output something. It says your first name is null and your last name is null. So James doesn't have a name, nor does he have a surname, but the output function does run. Okay, so that's just how you can do things. You can also create constructors in a different light. For example, a constructor that only takes in a first name, for instance. However, I'm not going to do that. I think you guys get the idea of how these constructors work. So just like that, you could also have another class, let's say a car, and you can have a constructor that takes in maybe the colors, the number of wheels. Maybe it's a vehicle, not necessarily a car. Takes in the number of the tires or the wheels and the tint and all that sort of stuff, and then just based off of the constructor you can pass in information to that vehicle at the very beginning, just like we did here. Okay, so based off of that, because you did this, you don't need to now create getters and setters. However, you still can if you want the program to be able to change these values as time goes on. For example, later on in the program, maybe you need the user to be able to change the names. So think about it, maybe you're building a phone book application, right? And you want the user to initially insert their first name, or maybe when they're creating an account, insert their first name and their last name and their date of birth and email address, etc. But then later on in the program, maybe it's a website or a mobile application, you want to allow the user to be able to change their names and surnames and other things, right? So you give them that privilege by creating a setter. Now in the public, you will now also go and say, okay, void set name, for instance, and then you allow them with the setter, right, or a mutator, to be able to change their name and surname. And you can actually do this. In fact, let me just give you a demonstration how you would do that. So set name, I'll create a function for it right here. I'll say void person set name, right? And here I'll say, okay, so set name needs to take in a parameter. So you need to pass in the actual name that you want, right? It will be a string. It'll take in the first name, and also take string, take in the last name. And similarly, in the definition of this, we need to allow it to pass in the first name and the last name. And when it passes in the first name and the last name, we're gonna say, okay, so actually let's just say new first name, sorry, and new last name, just so that we don't confuse the program. Okay, new last name, new first name, new last name. Just make sure that it matches the one here at the inside of this class. Okay, and just like that, we'll just say, just like how we did with this one, the constructor, we can just now set. Okay, and then but then we'll just change these my's to new first name and last name. I'll run that. Okay, I didn't output anything. So okay, I created this function set name, and then what I sorry, I just had random thoughts. So now what I'm gonna do is, let me just get rid of James here for a second. So I've created person Daniel, right, which his name is Daniel Jumpman, and we've displayed their names, right? That's gonna call the display function. Now what I want to do is I want to now set new name. So I'm gonna say Daniel dot set name, right? And set name, I'm gonna pass in the new name. So I'm gonna pass in maybe Frank, and I'm gonna pass in Frank Samuels, and then I've changed the name, right? But I still need to display it so that we can see the output. And then there we go. I called in the display name again. Let's see if this does anything. And there we go. So Daniel Jumpman and then Frank Samuels, and this is for the same actual object, but now when we call the display the second time, we get different outputs. And this is basically how constructors work. They're there to initialize at the very beginning, but then you can still continue on doing it, whatever it is that you wanted to do afterwards. Constructors are very important in C++ classes and in classes overall. And from here on out, whenever you do create a class, make sure that you create a constructor. Even if the constructor does nothing, just include it. Yeah. So now, abstract data type. This entire thing that we created right here is an abstract data type. What do you mean? It's an abstract data type because an abstract data type is basically a class that has the definition, or the declaration, I mean to say, separate from the actual implementation. So if you look at this class here, right, it has all the information that you need. Just by looking at it, you know which functions are inside and you know which variables are inside, but you don't necessarily know how they're implemented, right? The implementation is all the way down here. All this stuff right down here is the implementation itself. So as a programmer, and you're giving your code to someone else, maybe they want to use your class, you can just copy this and paste them and give it to them, right? Or however way you go about it. But as long as they know this information, they can use your class, right? They don't need to know this other stuff here, that how you implemented your class. As a matter of fact, in future videos, you'll see that we actually separate these two files. We put the implementation in a separate file and the declaration in a separate file. But this, as it stands right here, is an abstract data type. So if you're following my other videos, you know that we've been doing abstract data types the entire time. Okay, it's probably in maybe the first classes video where we didn't, but ever since then these have been abstract data types. So that's it from this video, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.